On April 20th, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon disaster changed the lives of millions living near the Gulf of Mexico, as well as the scientists who responded to the crisis. These are some of their stories, intimate portraits of research, innovation, discovery. Welcome, I'm Jim McNamee, editor of Dispatches from the Gulf, a series of documentaries, short videos, and podcasts. In today's podcast, we're heading down to New Orleans, but we're going to skip Bourbon Street and instead visit Tulane University, where Assistant Professor Sunshine Van Bael has been doing her research since 2012. But back in 2010, she was over 1,000 miles away, working at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama. That's where she first heard about the Deepwater Horizon Oil Spill.
I saw the news coverage, and I was very familiar with New Orleans. I had spent a lot of time in New Orleans, even though I didn't live there. And I was familiar with what happened with Hurricane Katrina. And to see this big disaster so close to New Orleans striking again was really, really heartbreaking. I had done oil spill research before in Alaska. Obviously, we have a lot of big oil spills in Alaska as well. So it really caught my eye, and I was really concerned about the coast and all of the plants and animals that depend on the coast, as well as animals that would be influenced in the ocean. So I got a job here at Tulane, and that was 4 years ago, and I began to study the impacts of the oil spill on plant bacterial interactions.
We joined Sunshine in one of Tulane's greenhouses. Inside are rows and rows of buckets filled with marsh grasses. Sunshine explains what's going on.
We have set up an experiment to understand how plants and bacteria work together to clean up buried pockets of oil in the marsh. So we're interested in understanding how plants can incubate bacteria that break down oil and deliver them through their root systems down to these buried pockets of oil. And so our long-term goal is to be able to understand how these plant bacterial associations are influencing the cleanup of oil. So one possibility is that in the future, we could inoculate plants with certain types of bacteria that we know are good for breaking down oil. And then we could plant those plants in a marsh where we know there are buried pockets of oil. And then the plants would be delivering these bacteria down to these areas where oil is buried.
In order to collect their samples for the experiment, Sunshine and her team frequently travel out to an area called Bay Jimmy. Bay Jimmy is one of many small bays in the Mississippi River Delta, off the eastern tip of Louisiana. Its marshes were hit hard by Deepwater Horizon oil.
So when we go out to the field, we collect soil from areas that received oiling in the oil spill, and we also collect soil from areas that did not receive any oil. And we're expecting that when we extract DNA from the soil of oiled versus unoiled, that we're going to find really different microbial communities. We bring that soil back here to the greenhouse, and we're using that soil to grow plants and to understand what happens to the bacteria living in the roots of plants when oil is present versus when oil is not present. And so in these buckets here, we have plants growing with oil and in oiled soil, and then we have some buckets without plants. And really, we want to understand how the roots of the plants are interacting with oil and how the bacteria are being transferred through the roots and into the soil. When we go back to the lab, we take samples from here and we get measurements on how much of the oil is left, what components of oil are there, so what has been broken down, and then in our lab, we study the bacterial communities living in the soil and then also in the roots of the plants. What we're doing here is very applied because we know that we can apply this knowledge to future oil spills. We know that people are going to continue to pump oil out of the ocean, and so these oil spills are likely to happen again. So what we need to know as scientists is how can we be better ready to respond to disasters like this in the future?
Today, thousands of scientists, oceanographers, chemists, engineers, biologists are all working together to develop newer and better ways to understand and ease the impact of oil spills. To learn more about their work, visit our webpage at dispatchesfromthegulf.com. Funding for this podcast was provided by a grant by the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. And thanks for listening.